Hello everybody, and welcome back to another review. This time I'd like to talk about the Moon Audio Dragon Inspire IHA-1 tube amplifier. And this is going to be quite a detailed review, so I do recommend you check out the written version if you want more details if you are considering this amplifier in the future. So, starting with the build quality and features, the compactness of the IHA-1 surprised me when I unboxed it 10 months ago, as I had forgotten the exact size when I tried it at first in CanJam, London in 2016. And after shopping around and seeing amps with so many different kinds of tubes plugged in, this amplifier seemed quite approachable to me because it has a very simple 2 preamp and 1 rectifier design. When it comes to build quality, it's quite solid, although I did notice one day that a small piece of plastic had chipped off at some point. I don't remember when this happened. It hasn't really left my side table, so. It should be noted that this amplifier is not balanced, it's single-ended, despite that 4-pin XLR output in the front existing. Also, a bit interestingly, there is no volume or sound degradation if both the XLR and the quarter-inch outputs are used simultaneously. 2 sets of single-ended inputs exist in the back, with a front dial allowing you to switch between the two, and putting the amp on standby mode, which is the middle setting, cutting off any sound. The volume dial is on a stepped attenuator. I usually never really go beyond the 12 o'clock mark, but I have heard of people saying this amp, even with the Lundau transformer upgrade, isn't loud enough for them entirely, which boggles my mind a bit. You guys need to not listen to stuff that loud. The Lundau transformers are an upgrade I opted for, and they cost about $250 more than the stock IHA-1. To my knowledge, these don't add more wattage to headphones, but rather more of a clean gain, and I find this essential if you are planning on using planar magnetic headphones with this amplifier. I also opted to get the pre-outs in the back installed for an extra $100. This was an option back then, but now it's been made mandatory, and the $100 cost has been added to the baseline price of this amplifier. These had significant hum when used with my active speakers, and nothing I tried could eliminate that. I surmised they were designed for passive systems, so I just stopped using them. At the time I purchased this, the stock tubes were a pair of new old stock Raytheon 6SN7s alongside a JJ5Y3 GT, with upgrade options being a pair of Sylvania 6SN7 GTA or GTB preamp tubes alongside an RCA 5U4GB. These have since been changed, as you can see on the specifications list on the website, and I assume Moon rotates according to availability. So the IHA-1's main strength in terms of sound, if you share my obsessive inclinations in this hobby, is a bit of a double-edged sword, because it simply morphs with whatever tubes you plug in, and it is a very capable blank canvas in doing so. On one hand, I have no doubt that a large number of users will be perfectly happy with the stock tubes, but I also don't doubt that others like myself will find the payoff from trying different tube pairings to be quite substantial, as the differences are not subtle. The sound of the amplifier itself is also very much to my liking. I've tried a variety of sources with it, and I felt that it did not stretch nor narrow the soundstage in any way by itself. Its own tendencies are geared towards detail retrieval and trying to remove itself from the chain as much as possible. It's because of this that I found, with a tube pairing that I'm familiar with, this is quite an easy amplifier to evaluate source gear with. The bass amount might, however, be a bit of a drawback for some, particularly those who are used to certain solid-state offerings with elevated punch. I don't find the IHA-1 thin or unsatisfying at all, but with certain tubes it can be very far from that. It can be quite bassy, but I will admit it's a bit leaner than aforementioned solid-state amps. It's interesting because I had heard through the grapevine that the IHA-1 was an amp that is very similar to a solid-state amp in sound, despite injecting the benefits of tubes as well, but the bass will immediately give it away to you if you are someone who is used to a lot of slam. The mid-range is remarkably transparent and clean sounding, with no emphasis in lower or upper registers. Now the former is something I've heard with the Felix Audio Elise, and when I reviewed that last year I pointed out this tonal difference with the IHA-1. If a slightly warmer and more euphonic experience is what you want from your tube amp, you can basically just swap in some tubes to cater to your needs, and later on in the video I'll talk about some tube pairings that will help you out in that regard. So I personally prefer a more even ascent up the frequency spectrum with the IHA-1, So I did swap out the stock tubes for something I found more neutral, more resolving. Although I did find the stock tubes very capable and a good stock option on Moon Audio's part. I'm talking about the preamp tubes, by the way. And while I would not characterize the IHA-1 as a bright amplifier, I would again mention that this isn't a warm and gooey experience that some enjoy tube amps for. It can be taken there to an extent, but it will never quite go all the way, as the treble is delicately balanced yet has the ability to soar, and does not seem etched with the majority of tube pairings that I've tried. It also doesn't become too rolled with others, changing just enough without removing an important aspect of the listening experience. Now that I've attempted to explain the tonality of the amplifier, I'd like to mention what I enjoy about this amp the most is its ability to bring out more detail in tracks. Not to be too dramatic, but I heard this the first time I plugged it in with the stock tubes even. And even today, talking about this 10 months later, I'm hearing the same benefits from the stock tubes when I tried them again, even though I haven't used them in almost as much time. Track separation is very well done, depending on your source, and that stereotypical thing of, oh, I'm hearing things I don't hear before because of low-level details being well represented is in full effect if this is a significant upgrade to your source chain. So paired with a shit Yggdrasil and driving a so-called utopia, I often find myself in the position in music where I've listened to something for a long time and then I hear a shift in how I hear it because of this amplifier. More is exposed, and it's quite honestly a struggle for some people like myself to not chase further than the stock tubes to enhance this ability. And on that topic, let's talk about the tubes. Starting with the preamp tube pairings, let's talk about the Raytheons. Now, I understand why this was included in my set as a preamp stock option. These managed to display the capabilities of the IHA-1 sufficiently while retaining a bit of the stereotypical tube warmth that some expect. So I'll admit that sweetness in the mid-range is quite compelling with this pair and could be a reason why some would return to this after an upgrade, but the disadvantages are that it can, compared to better offerings, mask detail a bit and it's a bit laid back. Sylvania 6S and 7 GTAs. Now these are possibly available from Moon Audio every now and then to add to the order for an extra $100. These are my favorite 6S and 7 option. The Sylvanias kind of veer towards the brighter sound of things and have a very well controlled bass alongside that, along with the sparkling and detailed highs. The mid-range isn't as lush as the Raytheons, but they have more texture to my ears. But be careful when you're pairing these with bright rectifiers such as the RCA5R4GY, because it might be too much trouble for some. Warmer than the Raytheons and even more masking of detail, the main reason for using the Kenrads is the bass slam injection, because these are fuller in the lows and these tubes are punchy and quite good for EDM and other electronic genres, but these aren't something I'd want for jazz or classical music. So interestingly, Drew told me that they had made revisions to the amp that made it no longer support this tube set, despite me reading somewhere that Dennis Had's favorite preamp tubes for the IHA-1 wore these. But I did buy some, and simply put, they do work, at least in my unit. These are considerably lower output than the 6S and 7s, and they have a bit more of a mature warmth to them than Kenrads or Raytheons. It's somewhere between them and the more articulate Sylvanias. However, you will need to crank the volume on the amp even further to volume match these, and there is a slightly higher noise floor than the 6S and 7s. So on to rectifier tubes. So the stock option when I bought these was the JJ5Y3. Now the major failing of this rectifier is its sub-bass control. This wasn't quite apparent with the Utopia, headphones that don't dive down as deep. But when you do plug in one that does, it's very noticeable. It's flabby and sluggish in the bass, and these will slow down the punchiness in such headphones and be an unsatisfying listen. So I recommend replacing them even if you don't have headphones that use such well-extended lows. The cheapest replacement for the stock JJ that I can think of are these. So these are a mere $15 on eBay, and they will gain you a considerable upgrade in lower bass control. Overall sound is leaner than the JJ and not very euphonic at all. To my understanding, these are current production tubes made in Russia, and I find them quite capable, but far from my favorite pairing for the IHA-1. These are production tubes based on the legendary mullered black bass tubes made in Blackburn way back in the day. The difference is that these are currently made in Russia by allegedly Electro-Harmonics, who purchased the original machinery from the UK factory. It's considerably cheaper than the original tubes. I had hopes that these would match them, but that wasn't the case. These sound more like Electro-Harmonic's own 5v4 GBs than the original Muller's GZ34 black bass tubes. Lean and a bit etched in the treble, these don't sound stereotypically tubey at all, and detail retrieval and bass control is similar to the cheaper Electro-Harmonic's 5v4 GB as well. It's a bit of a head scratcher why these exist, to be honest. The original Mullers can be found for anywhere between $50 to $100 and beyond. These are warmer than their reissues, but have a more organic sound that will immediately be appreciated by those chasing tube characteristics. They also have ample bass compared to the reissues that were a bit lean throughout. The treble is a bit rolled, however, and detail retrieval is more or less equal to 5v4 GB variants. Staging is a bit narrow too. Despite the aforementioned organic sound, these are possibly some of the most solid state sounding tubes you can get for the IHA-1 due to their very focused presentation that does away with any slightly romantic, diffuse, ethereal sounds as some might expect from tubes. So, by far the most I've spent on tubes, the metal-based GZ34 earns its reputation due to its incredible melding of detail retrieval with a focused sound that somehow still retains a slight etherealness to its signature that makes some genres very satisfying to listen to. There's a slight lingering to the decay, which is in addition to the IHA-1 because it doesn't do this by itself. This decay is very romantic sounding without overstaying its welcome, and it's a very delicate balancing act, and it's very effective. But I wouldn't recommend it for its bass capabilities, however, as it's quite lean in that area. The mid-range is the highlight, as detail is presented effortlessly alongside texture. What sets this apart further over the aforementioned rectifiers is its timbre, as it takes the ability of the shit Yggdrasil to recreate live acoustic instruments so well, and takes it a step further, especially with pianos. Furthermore, it does all of this in a very non-fatiguing way, as the treble is not harsh nor hiked. In fact, I'd go so far to say that it's ever so slightly rolled off in the high treble compared to the likes of like the RCA 5R4s, but that doesn't bother me so much due to the other benefits that it brings. And do I recommend this? Yes, but you'd have to be insane to buy it for its current market price, and I seemingly am. These were available to add to your IHA-1 order for an extra $100 back in the day. They might still be, I'm not sure, although their market price is lower than that if you check online. So these are a considerable jump from the stock JJ5Y3s, and the RCA 5v4s is a warm tube with a bit of bloom for those who desire it. Its bass control is also a substantial upgrade over the stock option, but its strength is a musical sound, but it kind of lacks some detail retrieval and resolve compared to other options if those attributes are important to you. My favorite of the warmer, bassier rectifier options is the Westinghouse 5v4 GB, and this sounds like an upgraded RCA 5v4 GB with more resolve to it. Its bass managed to balance being ample and well controlled to a level that all these other rectifiers simply do not, as they either veer towards being lean and controlled or ample and bloomy usually, compared to this. What I like furthermore is that just a little bit more sparkle in the treble helps it be a really great all-rounder tube, even more so than the metal-based GZ34, and a great value if you can get it for like $50 or less. These go neck and neck with the metal-based GZ34 in terms of detail retrieval, but it easily beats it in staging width, but it loses out in timbre. The Brimar is lean in the bass and a bit rolled in the treble, but it has stellar detail reproduction. While I do like it overall, the problem lies in its timbre being off for several instruments, making them sound a bit muted and not letting them soar quite as much as they need to. That being said, these probably have the most upper mid-range emphasis out of all these rectifiers I'm talking about today. Strings have a considerable air to them, but the treble is where the drawbacks begin. Also, the lower mid-range is a bit scooped, which can slightly hamper male vocals and guitars, areas where the 5v4 GBs were better. I have parted ways with this tube as I wasn't really using it that much, but its detail retrieval and instrument separation made it quite a tough sale for me regardless. And finally, cheaper than the Brimar 5R4, the RCA has the most treble sparkle of any tube detail here today. Well extended highs and more representation in the lower mid-range makes this the clear winner over its counterpart, in my opinion. That being said, it does take a small hit in detail retrieval and track separation compared to the Brimar, and its staging width is narrower, although still wider than these other rectifiers. If you had to pick any two of these rectifiers in the list today, with a max budget of like $100 for both, I would probably say grab RCA 5R4GY and a Westinghouse 5V4GB, and these you can just switch between them. You'll be well covered in all bases. This amplifier is my second favorite audio purchase of last year, and it's really as simple as that. 10 months down the road, and my opinion of it has not dampened, and any disappointments I may have had in the early days, such as the hum in the preamp section, kind of faded as I doubled down on the best aspects of this and how to use it best, which is to drive dynamic driver headphones paired with my shit Yggdrasil. I found my favorite tube pairings, and I've familiarized myself with them over time. But despite the praise I see for this amplifier online, I do still feel like it's a bit underrated in the audio community as a whole. Like the Headfight Thread pales in comparison to the cheaper and more popular Felix Elise and the far more ubiquitous shit offerings. I don't know if this is a lack of marketing push, which is intentional on the part of Moon Audio and Drew. Maybe they don't want to overload Dennis with orders. I can't tell. I don't know. But all I know is I'm really enjoying mine, and I can confidently say that this took my appreciation of the hobby to the next level when I first got it 10 months ago. So thank you for watching my review. Consider this my comeback. It's been a while since I've been active in the community. Please do check out my new Patreon, which I have linked in the description below, if you would like to support this channel. And as always, I will see you next time. Cheers.